Good morning and welcome to Millionaire Brand Creation. I'm your host, Michael Banovac, and I'm very, very excited to have a friend of mine on here today. Actually, Heather, you are the first female we have interviewed in our interview process, so I'm really excited. And Heather
Yay!
Wagenhals is the
I'm so
author
stoked.
of
I'm
Yes
number
You
one.
Can. Yes, yes, you are. She's the author of Yes You Can. She's the host of Unlock Your Wealth Radio. And you've done a lot of wealth creation and a lot of national speaking gigs around the nation and beyond with friends of ours, actually. So, Tom Hopkins, I think I told you last time, is one of my clients. And we've sold him multiple homes and a good friend of ours. As well as you've worked with Brian Tracy, you've worked with Stephen Covey, you've worked with some big names, and you've been on CNN, Smart Money, AOL, and many, many other things to master. So, welcome to the show, Heather. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Heather, I want to jump into it because this show is really about entrepreneurship, and a lot of our viewers are real estate agents. They're in the real estate space, similar to yourself. I know you've worked extensively in the real estate space. Uh, Tell us a little about you and your story growing up. What gave you that entrepreneurial drive that you have today?
I don't know that anything specific gave me the drive. It's just how it was. My father left when my brother and I were really small, and my mother was divorced with two small children in the 70s when it wasn't cool to be a single mom. If you didn't have a man, you had a lot of issues. First off, you couldn't apply for credit by yourself. So my mother couldn't buy a car by herself, couldn't buy a house without a co-signer. She was penalized economically for family size. So there was a lot of challenges, and I was the oldest, so it was up to me to go out and start making money and figuring out how to do that. And my first business I had, I was 11 years old. And so it's just what you did with growing up. And I think that working for myself, I can determine my own income. I'm not subject to the whims of others. That's what I liked about being able to do all those things and have my own business was the ability to be able to name my own price. And if I wanted to earn more, I could, because I could just do more work, do different work, and figure out how to optimize my time and then train others to do what I did if I wanted to multiply my income. But if I'm flipping burgers, whether I flip five this hour or 50, I still get paid the same amount of money. And I like getting paid for the value I bring to an hour, not what someone deems that hour is worth.
So when you started out, what was your first, career choice or what have you when you jumped into the work world after being raised by a single mother?
It's interesting because I started college, but I had always been working. And one of the things that I've been really good at my entire life is speaking publicly. I used to compete in speech and debate in high school, and I'd been speaking for a long time. So, the first job, a real job, was actually a professional speaker. And I worked for National Education Centers, which owned Arizona Automotive Institute. And being a wrench and a car fan and a gearhead, and I took auto shop in high school, it was really easy for me to go out to all the other different high schools because I was right around their age and I was able to connect with them because I could talk their language. And what was really exciting about that first job that I had is I set my own schedule, but I beat out people. I was only 18, but I beat out people with college degrees and masters because I had that stage presence and that ability to connect and deliver a message in and meet somebody where they were, if that makes sense. And I think you know that probably better as a salesman yourself. Everything we do is selling our ideas, our concepts, our investments. And you can't wait for people to come to your side of the fence. Well, meet me over here and then I'll show you how to invest. No, you have to go where the people are and you have to meet them wherever they are, wherever their level of experience is, and connect with them that way So then sales isn't like an adversarial sort of thing. It's more of let's take my hand, we'll walk side by side together. And so that's what I had early on. And I was able to just continue to develop and refine that through all of the different things that I pursued career wise, whatever that might have been at the time.
What got you into the teaching space? What made you want to empower other people with financial education, and especially those that, want to be successful and want to have a successful career path?
Well, it's interesting. So you mentioned my very first mentor outside of my grandfather, who was my most important figure in my life. But Tom Hopkins, when I went through his sales training program for the first time, his Academy of Champions, I actually had a process for connecting with people and moving them around because, everybody doesn't want to be like a slimy salesperson, but he brought professionalism and class to being a sales, and it was an honorable thing. When you went to Tom's professional training, you learned how to be that kind of a professional that you admired in him. And so once I was able to do that, I was able to kind of take on anything at that point. And one of the biggest challenges I had, because the money management techniques and tools that I grew up with were not very effective. It was,
What did you
if
grow
you have
up
a
with? What did you
coupon,
learn?
well, if you have a coupon or it's on sale, you are morally obligated to buy that item. It doesn't matter if you have to travel to the other side of a town and the discount is lower than the amount of gas you spend to get there. It doesn't matter if you have 20 of them still in the wrapper in the closet. My mom was a bit of a hoarder. That it didn't matter. Like, you had to have this under the auspices of saving money. And so the more I made because of all these great skills I acquired from Tom Hopkins, like my expenses outgrew my income, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing. But I thought, hey, I can make minimum payments on all these credit cards. And back in the 90s, you could have a minimum payment that was lower than the monthly interest, and your balance could still go up even if you were paying on time. So I had to learn money management, and it was a long process because I really knew what to do. I was a licensed stockbroker, for goodness sakes. I helped people make more money, but I couldn't get out of my own way. And once I figured that out and demystified all of that, I said, how do I put this into a process and share it with others? Because I started guest appearing on other people's radio programs, and then I became a sidekick, and then I wound up becoming my own show host. And now I have Unlock Your Wealth TV that's been on iHeartMedia for several years now. And I'm actually in the process of shopping networks. And so I might be launching in a new network next year. And as a result, like, of all of that, I watched people struggle. And as a mortgage lender and a real estate broker, what do we need? We need people with money. And it simply started at me having a home buyers club, teaching people how to correct their credit, how to budget more effectively, and how to save and invest. So I could get them at the time, interest rates on a subprime loan were double digits because the smoking deal on a 30-year fixed rate was 8.5% on FHA. So if they were pushed into that double digit realm, their affordability shrank. And most real estate agents only wanted to deal with A paper people, meaning people with amazing credit, all
Hmm.
the right money down, all of that sort of stuff in line, income and everything. But these people that were these subprime borrowers, if they just spent like 3 to 6 months fixing these few things. So on Saturdays, I just started volunteering teaching these classes. I created a system that kind of evolved itself into my Keys to Riches financial philosophy, which is now going to be celebrating its 20th year. And we're going to do a big celebration next year for the 20 years of the Keys to Riches. And that's kind of how it started, and then it just evolved from there. And then as the internet grew and people started taking classes online, I moved to an online platform, and here we are 20 years later.
Well, no, it's exciting. I remember we had lunch, and we were talking about ways to create wealth, etc. And I think one of the reasons people tune in here, especially after our live sessions, is because they're either A, wanting to grow their bottom line, grow their income, and expand their business, or B, maybe they're in a funk in their business, like many real estate professionals are in today's environment, and they're looking to light a fire, right? Do something that creates change in their lives, substantive change. So if you can, walk us through briefly your system. If I was a first grader, what is the exact steps you would take, Heather, to become financially independent at this point in your life, or for someone just starting out in their career?
Well, the rules apply for starting out or starting over. You have to accept where you are, because no change happens while we're wearing this big fluffy blanket of denial. So if you
Mm,
are older, if you have negative credit experiences, if you've been beaten up, if you've lost money investing, you have to accept that, yes, this is where I am and this is what's happened to me. And I can keep doing what I've always done, hoping for something different, or I can actually make a better choice. And so by accepting the fact that I've made mistakes is the first step. If you're just starting out, accept the fact that you don't know anything. And
hmm
you need to educate yourself before you start investing. I'm working with a friend's daughter right now who was given some money from a bit of an inheritance, and she caught the eye of some sales guy trying to hook her to an investment that's inappropriate for her age. And I was like, okay, and what other investments do you have? And let's take a look at your tiered system. So so she's like, "Well, I don't have a tiered system." And I'm like, she goes, "But I feel like this is going to be a really good investment." So accepting that we don't know what we don't know, knowing that a biology based approach to success is always appropriate, and we start analyzing where we are and not the why we made mistakes, because that's pretty easy, but we need to figure out the when that we made mistakes. And we do this with an organic assessment. So we look at what our spending has been and how we make our choices each and every day when it comes to financial decisions. And we have to learn how to be passionate about earning money and investing money, but we need to be impartial, reserved when it comes to spending money or making choices without enough factual information to make a decision. And it's easy to
mm.
get caught up in the hype. Who doesn't want 200% returns in 4 weeks, right?
Right, 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 right.
So we have to learn about what it is that we need to know. And my simple financial strategy that anybody can do at that first grade level you were talking about, and it's curious because I have a kid's book about money coming out, is a 3-5 financial strategy. And you ask
Okay.
yourself 3 questions and you address 5 areas of concern. So the questions are, where am I? All right. So this is like a balance sheet and your credit report. And it's also kind of your cash flow situation too. What do I have coming in? What do I have going out? So we're talking about debt service kind of stuff. Then we need to say, where am I going? So we have to pick a destination, right? So is it home ownership? Is it a new car? Is it income streams? What is our goal? And remembering that money is a tool, not a goal itself. So saying I want to be rich is
Mm,
fabulous, but it's a useless affirmation because it's so generic, and what's rich to you is different from rich to me. And our
right.
experiences in life also dictate what's rich. So we need to know where we're going. And this is a critical piece, because if we don't have this first piece of where I am, how do we know how to get there? And that's why we need the, where am I going? What's our measurement tool? Am I getting closer to or further away from our goals? And that's what the third part is. What's the difference? So then we
Mm,
analyze monthly what we did, what our daily dollars did. And that's how we figure out what we need to do. Then we address 5 areas of concern. And so the first area is income, expenses, and credit, right? And then we have our insurance and protections layer. So I need to insure with an I, insure for success, by ensuring my success, having that in place. So I need to use insurance as a tool. People think it's always a waste of money. But if you're not presently a millionaire and you cannot afford to repair or replace items in the event of risk of injury or loss or damage, things like that, then you have to rent that millionaire status by using insurance. So I can have $1 million in the bank and blow off pay insurance, or I can take and rent $1 million for a few bucks a month, depending on the type of insurance I'm insuring. So that is a critical piece because we have to be able to protect our income streams and our cash as we're growing and trying to build our wealth. Are you feeling like you're with me so far? Is this making sense to
I'm
you?
with you. No, I like it. I like it. Keep going deeper because this is what we want to know.
Okay. And these are the 3 exciting pieces. All right. So we have income accumulation, is our first one. And so asset accumulation is what we start. So whether that's buying actual a savings account, this is the initial collection of cash to begin the investment properly. So we do asset accumulation first, and then we have asset multiplication next. And so this is where we take and multiply our dollars, where we put them to work in different investment vehicles. You know, and it wasn't until the last few years that I really learned the stock market, ironically, because I sold stocks, but I never learned how to invest in them. But I loved real estate because I put $1 in the stock market and it can earn a rate of return based on X. But I could put
Right.
$1 in real estate and leverage 8 or 9
Yep.
others and
Yep.
have an exponential return. And I could build my wealth using other people's wealth. So the asset multiplication is the piece that you and I deal in every day, whether it's real estate, the investment markets, buying into business. I am also a private lender, so I invest in people, I invest in companies, I do all sorts of different direct investments not related to the stock market. And if it's an asset that I can touch or take, I really like those. I like secured assets, and that's kind of the asset class that I prefer. And then the final layer that we need to address in our areas of concern is asset preservation. And this is 2 things. So this is tax mitigation strategies and
Mm-hmm.
it's legacy building. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do I want my money to do after I'm gone? Who do I want to have it? Do I want my family to have it? Or am I going to do my best to educate them and I'm going to be philanthropic, with the rest of my money? Everybody thinks that the Hiltons made all their money from inheritance, but, he gave away 97% of his wealth, Baron Hilton, when he passed away. Only 3% went to his heirs. So this is something that you have to think about. And you have to do it sooner rather than later because tomorrow is never promised. And I just had a refresher
Mm.
course on that a few weeks ago, walking away from a fatal car accident. So you never know when your clock is going to get punched for that final time. And so you have to be prepared for that because if you don't take care of that layer of risk or that area of concern, it someone else is going to do it that doesn't know you, doesn't know your family, and doesn't know what you want. It's some arbitrary judge in a court. And so those three questions, 5 areas of concern, and that's all you have to do to become financially independent.
I like that. Yeah, I always tell people there's 3 layers that I would focus on, to create legacy wealth. And you can always know how wealthy someone is based on the way that they talk about money, right? First layer, I'm sure you would agree with this, is earned income, right? We trade time for money, and that earned income, creates our necessities, our food, our rent, whatever, right? And that's a lot of people in our industries, especially in the real estate industry or the mortgage industry, is they are trading time, a lot of time, for hopefully a lot of money. But in many cases, that's not the case because of the IRS and state governments, right? The second level, which you talked about, which I really loved, is how do you take your earned income and transition that into reoccurring passive assets as quickly as possible, right? How do you take that money, that $1,000, leverage it into $10,000 into a real estate investment and create a reoccurring drip in perpetuity in your heirs, right? That's the second level. And the third
Yeah.
level is the chess game of how do I take these assets that I now own and how do I take that investment capital and reallocate that into acquiring more investments and or other assets that diversify me against risk? I think what a lot of people don't understand, which you hit very well, is that being wealthy is a very risky endeavor, especially if you're invested in one thing, right? I'm all in on the stock market. I'm all in real estate. I'm all in one company. That's very dangerous play. Those that are able to mitigate a lot of this stuff have a lot of irons and a lot of different fires. And it's almost a lever system. I'm sure you would agree with this, where if one goes down, they have another safety boat to jump onto to keep rowing. How do you educate and help people at different stages of their financial path to make sure that they have a lot of different financial levers they can pull when hardship occurs in their life?
Well, having a tiered savings and investing system is the beginning. And so when folks do either my workshops or we do one-on-one private coaching, we make sure that we can maintain income so that we have enough cash at the ready in very liquid assets that are trying to at least keep pace with inflation or at least take a little bit of that bite out. So we always have the ability to make effective decisions without the duress of emotional influence or physiological
Mm,
influence. I study the
hmm.
brain and behavior, and I've committed myself to that because my problems weren't with knowing what to do. For goodness sakes, the Series 7 stockbrokers exam is grueling. And I passed that with very high marks. And I still only learned how to sell the stuff. I knew how the instruments worked. And somebody else was the analyst at my company. I was just told, Heather, we're focusing on this share today, this company today. We need to rearrange our clients here. And I just was an order taker, or a sales girl. Like what
Hmm.
they told me to sell, that's what I sold that day. But I didn't really quite understand all of that. And if you are all in, and amazingly enough, and you probably know this because you work with a lot of high net worth individuals, entrepreneurs are the worst at this because they are all in on their own company. And if they're
Right,
public, they're at
right, right.
mercy. Yes. And
Yep.
so they're betting on them. And they're not usually covered in the protections category. So they don't have proper income replacements. They don't have like a version of workers' comp for themselves. They don't have the proper insurance tools in place, maybe key man policies on their business partners. If the brains of your business is an adventure guy and he skydives and he rides motorcycles, it's really prudent for you to have that, especially if you don't know how to write the code to do that programming and people just don't consider this. So
Yeah.
we have to educate them because we're only as effective at decision making based on the information we have and our ability to maintain our highest resource state physiologically. And so if we don't have that
Mm.
emergency fund, we're going to start feeling it chemically in our bodies. We have those adrenaline dumps, we become hypervigilant. I know when one of my relatives returned from a high conflict area when they were in the military, they still sketched and would pull me off to the other side of the street if they saw the back of a car sagging, because that usually meant it was an IED or there was some sort of explosives weighted down, like fertilizer, things like that. And we're safe in America, walking through a very nice suburb of Arizona here, and still that hypervigilance, that chemical is like keeping them on guard. And what we know about the brain and behavior is once we start dumping chemicals, it moves blood away from the brain out to our extremities so we can fight, freeze, or flee. So our ability to reason is gone like that because we're just not getting circulation to that prefrontal cortex. And to make it like an understandable kind of connection. So imagine if you go into your boss's office and he just starts ripping you to pieces for something you didn't do. You knew the guy in the next cubicle made a mistake or whatever, but you can't really throw your buddy under the bus. And if you beat him up, it's not likely you'll have a job to come back to tomorrow. And running away isn't an option either. So you sit there and take it, right? And you don't know what to say because you're just fuming that you've been accused of something you didn't do. So you start boiling. You're having this chemical dump. And then, a couple hours later, you're out having drinks with the boys and you're saying, yeah, well, I should have said this and should have said that and blah, blah, blah. And I wish I'd have done this and that in that moment. But it's only because you're outside of that event, your body's had a chance to process and discard all of those chemicals that you can even think of those witty comebacks. You're not thinking about it in the moment because
Mm-hmm.
you're emotionally, physiologically engaged in that process. And so that emergency fund is the most critical piece that people can have because they have to be able to make rational decisions about their investments. And I make jokes about stuff too because I have some, investments that I'm tied into, and there's some negative emotions around that. So I always have to check myself when I go to look at this investment or make a decision, and I have to discuss it with somebody who's not emotionally engaged like I am, because I need to make sure that I'm making the best decision and the most rational one for me in that moment, and that I'm not doing anything rash.
What does the quote knowledge is superfluous without application mean to you? I know that's something that you run your personal mantra through.
Yeah, so it goes back to this physiology first approach to success. It doesn't matter how much we know if we don't do what we know. We only do what
Mm,
we've practiced.
that's true.
So we're not in the habit of saving, and you bring in somebody, and this is the thing that really pissed me off because I was in the trenches before the mortgage crisis. And I was asked on my radio show, a caller called in and said, when do you think the real estate bubble is going to pop? This is in '03. And I said, that's not what you got to look out for. And they're like, what? And I said, I'm in the trenches. I'm watching things happen. I'm watching these mortgage products come out. And the mortgage bust is going to be more massive and more devastating than you can ever imagine. And that's what you have to look out for. And I said, it's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this because these products came out onto the marketplace, no income, no asset verification loans.
Ninja
And what they
loans.
did, yes. And so with these loans, they only qualified people like one over the start rate. And the start rate, the LIBOR was so low because, once the turn of the century, we're at war, interest rates dropped to almost nothing. You could get a 3%, or 2.5% mortgage on your home. And these people didn't read the fine paperwork, especially the subprime mortgage people, because now they could go on an
Mm.
adjustable rate loan and they could buy more house. They could still get the house that they wanted. But the lenders, because there was just so much going on, and this is why I transitioned into real estate, because I couldn't, like, I wanted to sleep at night, and there was no way that I was going to put somebody in a home, maxing out their income at one over the start rate when their margin, their lifetime cap could be that first year's adjustment. and they would not be able to take a 6% hike in their mortgage payment interest. So a lot of them paid negative amortization for a while. I had this lady argue with me saying, I can't afford to live in it. And she's showing me her statement, and she was paying the negative amortization. So every time she made a payment, she still owed more. It was just adding that interest back into the mortgage. And so her balance kept going up every month. And I said, you can't afford this property. And I said, I didn't do your loan to begin with. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for the person who misled you to think you could afford this home, because you don't have the income or assets. You have a salary job. It doesn't matter how much harder you work. You're not going to make any more money at the end of the month. And I couldn't refinance
I
her
think
into another product.
here's the thing I think is really interesting. What do you learn most through hardship, right? When 2008 occurred, how did you pivot and or deal with that turmoil in your life? And how were you financially impacted with that?
Well, because I was sitting there and I was tracking, this was before the multiple listing service got really sophisticated. So I had my own way to trend the markets. And I was running Tom Chambers Properties at the time because I hadn't been in business as a real estate agent long enough to be a broker. So I was the director of operations for Tom Chambers Properties. And the broker and I, who's one of my real estate mentors, I would track the market every morning. I'd get in and I would check these numbers. And in '05, we started telling all of our clients that were investment clients to start liquidating. And if you remember here in Arizona, what was going on, we were having concrete shortages. People were flipping their deposits on new builds and new construction. Everybody's getting qualified for this. And we had just an artificially low inventory period because that's when real estate prices in California was getting untenable. So all that 1031 exchange money was pouring into Arizona, and they started paying more for properties than what they were worth. I put an $80,000 condo on the listing, on the multiple listing service. I had 40 offers in a half an hour. Nobody had ever shown the property. I checked my lockbox, not one showing. And some of the offers were ridiculous, like $5 over your highest price. I sold that thing for 150% of its value in 2 days. Like by the time we weeded through all of the conditional loan approvals. And so that, coupled with my tracking of the marketplace, and the most critical number that I was watching at the time was the ratio of median home price to median income. And it was at 4.1 when the market popped. And so I was watching that because that, the money makes real estate go. People don't buy real estate without money or the ability to qualify for money. And so when I started seeing these values going, and they were writing these things and paying the difference of these purchase prices when they wouldn't appraise, because appraisers held their ground for the longest time because it was only an inventory shortage. It wasn't an actual value increase in our marketplace. And so they held the line for about 6 months to a year. And so as this was going on in '05, we strategized as a company and said, we need to take our clients to cash. I made 2 other phone calls in addition to that. And one of my very dear friends, that was, this is when I was still a lender. And in '03, '04, I called a couple of my real estate friends and I said, you need to call every mortgage company and become their REO specialist, which stands for real estate owned, or those are the repossessed homes. And I said, you'll get 1 or 2 listings now. But I made so many real estate agents multimillionaires. My one friend, he was #1 at Remax for like 7 years running. 7 years. He was the top dog.
Because
Just
REO
because
business.
in just the REO business, when all of these loans started going belly up. So we were ahead of the marketplace. We weren't caught by it. And since we were all in cash positions, I bought out a couple of one of those condo conversions where they took an apartment complex, over improved it, and put marble,
Mm-hmm.
and granite countertops in entry level housing in low income neighborhoods. And I was buying condos for 10,000. I'm not even unlocking the door, and I was flipping them for 20,000. We bailed developers out of projects. I just now still, what is it, like 10, 15 years later now, I'm still hanging on to a few pieces of land where we bailed out a developer. We bought up all of his lots because there was nothing able to sell. And I hung on to them because we bought them pennies on the dollar, and now, I'm, getting like a 10,000% return on some of that stuff. It's crazy that because I just
Yeah.
hung on to it. And so we were lucky that we were paying attention to the marketplace. And because, we did residential and commercial, but my focus has always been investors. I don't have patience for people that go look at a house. It's the right house for them, but they're turned off by the 70s shag carpet and burnt orange curtains, and they can't see past that. An investor isn't buying for the carpet or the curtains. He's buying to fund his kid's college education in 10 years. He needs an
Mm-hmm.
income stream. He's buying for different reasons. So it doesn't matter what the asset looks like. It only matters the quality of the asset and what can we buy it for. Because
Okay,
as you know, in real estate,
okay,
money.
Heather. Here's my big question now. Okay, so now you've seen what happened obviously in '08. You saw the warning signs in 2005. Where are we today? What do you foresee in the near future?
We're on our way back there because those
Nope, I
mortgage
agree.
products are bad.
Yep.
All of those mortgage products, and let me tell you this, everybody likes to vilify Wall Street for what they did with the default swaps, but here's what I know, and as an entrepreneur: if there is not demand in a marketplace, products go away. So there's demand in the marketplace, and those were great loans for the right people. Those loans were never meant for salaried or W-2 income people. Those loans were meant for entrepreneurs, for commissioned people like real estate agents who one month they make, 25,000, the next they make 2,000. That where their income varies. Those are the people that those loans were meant for, the no income, no asset verification loans. They weren't meant for the Home Depot clerk that was trying to buy a condo with a $2,000 a month HOA fee. So all that stuff is back. And I haven't tracked, that my favorite ratio is median home price to median income. But when that median home price becomes untenable, and the last time I had checked, we were at 4. And so I haven't checked in a while, but that's the number. When median housing, so that's the general population, so that's everybody, kind of mushed together. When that gets out of whack, that's the symptom that we need to be treating right then and there, and say, what is the problem here? Are people overbuying? Are they undersaving? And we need to look at human behavior, because it's the behavior that's the problem. Markets come and go. People have to move because of work. People now have lifestyle choices because we're able to work from home in a different way where we can still be present and connected with all of technology, but not have to go into an office anymore. So people are still moving and stuff like that all over the place. But how are they faring? And I know there's a new build or a new construction on the west side of town. I just found out they haven't had, and it's a upper middle class neighborhood. Not one new build sale since August. Not one.
Well, what I'm seeing across the board too, you look at big names in the home building space like Lennar, Pulte, Meritage, all of these master plan communities. I'm seeing
Hmm.
huge email blasts to where they're reducing prices. They are buying down rates the best they can to help owners. They are giving a ton of concessions. They are giving real estate agents 5% commissions on the buy side, and they're buying mimosas and muffins on the weekends trying to get out there. Now, if that doesn't tell you
Right?
there's a problem in the market, I don't know what will. And it's interesting because what I've been spouting, and I wonder if this is how you feel too, is a lot of people ask me, where do you think we're going? And I said, I think the biggest problem is a lot of people are in an equity squeeze. What's an equity squeeze? Well, in my mind, the equity squeeze is a lot of people's net worths is tied to equity in their homes and or equity in other real estate investments and or equities in the stock market, and they do not have enough cash on hand. Because the biggest risk people have moving forward in the next, I'd say 6 to 18 months is insolvency. That's the biggest problem. People don't understand how cash flows work because in literally a matter of 2 weeks, if your income streams are disrupted, and you know this more than anyone because you teach this, it doesn't matter how much money you're worth on paper, you have the ability to be at huge risk and the ability to go down instantly if you cannot pay your obligations. And that's where so many people fail is now they have to unload
Yeah.
assets that are things that took them years to acquire because they absolutely have no choice because of insolvency issues. How do people deal with that in today's environment and high interest rate?
Well, how they dealt with it in '05 and all those rising prices, what did people run out and do to solve their cash flow crisis? Oh, I'll just take a home equity line of credit. And they treated their homes like ATM machines.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened when the market tanked 3 years later? And all of a sudden their notes are being called, or they're defaulting. I like to do some second mortgages for folks because uh, as a lender, strategically I get better interest, right? I lend privately like that, and I have the wherewithal to buy out the first trust deed and foreclose and take
Mm-hmm.
that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what people don't realize. They're like, well, there's a first mortgage holder. If I just pay my first mortgage, I'll be okay. Well, not necessarily, because I can accelerate
Yeah.
that note. So
Yeah.
so people aren't thinking clearly, and they're overconfident. They don't have enough information, or irrespective of the information they have, they make ineffective decisions. And
Yeah.
I'm listening to, and I see this, and not just in young people that don't know any better. That's why I see people that know better. It's the secret to building wealth is to spend less and invest more. That's secret. We all know that. But do we do that? No, because we're emotionally engaged to that paycheck because we put our blood, sweat, and tears in. And I put up with that boss for so long. And I'm entitled to this vacation, even though I'm taking a second mortgage out to fund a vacation. I don't even have a tangible asset I can liquidate to cover the debt. Like, at least if you bought a
Yeah.
boat or something, you could go sell it for something, right? And generate some cash flow. But that's the bigger concern, is that the people that are having these cash flow crunches are going to solve it with an improper tool.
Or they don't have any tools to solve it at all because they run out of assets to liquidate and things of that nature. I mean, I get DMs all the time, Heather, and it scares me because they're young individuals, men and women, and they said, I really like what you post on how to save your way to your first $100,000. You're talking about ways you need your money, etc. But a lot of them are drowning in debt and silent pain. A lot of them have a lot of mouths to feed, husbands, wives, kids, dogs, car payments, house payments. They're living a life that they technically cannot afford from a numerical standpoint. And what
Right.
I tell them is I said, the first thing I would do, even though I'm not the biggest proponent of his teachings, is I said, you got to read The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. That's number one. And you got to really start going to zero, because before you go to zero, there's no way you're going to become a millionaire. If you're negative 100, 200, $500,000, it's very difficult to get out of that, debt. I mean, it's just very difficult, especially when it's uncollateralized credit card debt, high interest debt, etc. That is the backbone of the American populace. And it's just so scary that now interest rates are so high that people are taking out 6, 7, 8% loans, chicklets, and they don't realize all that's going to come to roost sooner rather than later. How do you cope with something like that when you're teaching someone that's so far behind the eight ball? How can they get to zero if they need to?
Well, if they're financing their Ferragamos and, I don't know what the inflation, back in the 90s, there used to be this term, the $30,000 millionaires in Scottsdale. And so I don't know what that inflation adjusted figure is. Maybe it's the $90,000 millionaire now. But if you're financing your Ferragamos and not using a credit card as a tool, as in OPM, and you pay it off at the end of the month to get those great Amex points, then you've got some serious issues, because now the tough part isn't what to do, because you and I know what that means. It means liquidate the assets that have leverage and start over, but their egos are in play. No, like, I'm going to pay for this BMW, even though I lost my job, or I can't afford the payments, or I did this or did that, and they won't let go of it. And I'm speaking from experience, because I bought a BMW
Mm,
and I was like, oh, like, I've made it. I'm this rock star. Woo, right? And I financed it, and so I had payments on it. And when push came to shove, what had to go? Well, I was like, oh my God, I can't do that. I'm not going to fall from grace. And my ego
yeah.
got in the way. And then when other stuff started getting behind, and then I was like, the harder I worked, I also had a helper in liquidating my cash flow. So there's that piece. But you know, you reevaluate everything, not your financial behaviors, but your significant others' financial behaviors as well. And then I said, you know what? All right, I'm done. I'm gonna get rid of everything, and I'm gonna eat bologna sandwiches for the next 6 months until I knock out this debt. And if it wasn't vital to my survival that day, like fuel in my car to go see a customer, and mind you, I wasn't like just waiting tables. I was making good money in my early 20s. I was making six figures. I was banging out big dollars. But I was spending more than I was banging out. I had a helper
Yeah.
doing that. I was living the dream, right? But everything was leveraged,
Yeah.
including my loafers.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
it's not sustainable if you don't start putting things away. And I was a stockbroker, what to do with their money, but I wasn't listening. And so that's why all of that knowledge is superfluous unless you use it. And it's tough for us to get to that place and start using it when we have values binds, where we have an ego bind, we're emotionally attached to all of these things. And you just have to let go. I mean, I started over 3 times in my life because I didn't learn the
Mm,
lesson.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
built
Yeah.
up enough cash and reserves and assets, and then boom, I got taken out again. And I'm like,
Yep.
I need to take a step back and see what's going on. And all of my ineffective decisions were tied to a particular physiological state. And
Mm,
it was this state of entitlement. And once I figured that out, because I was so emotionally engaged to the money coming in, I made ineffective, emotional and physiological decisions that weren't in my best interest, because I was justified, darn it. I was entitled. And,
yeah. Yeah.
whoops. So now you're at the pawn shop, you're hawking your great watches, you're like taking all your stuff. Instead of donating to Goodwill, now you're not doing that. Now you're going to the consignment store hoping they can sell it for 25% of what you paid for it. And
So
then you're
when
calling
you
your
look back on
creditors.
your life and your successes and your failures, because I look back at mine even at a young age and go, whoa, I've lived a long life of ups and downs along the way, as I'm sure you have. What's the best
Mhm.
piece of advice that you've learned that you could share with the audience?
The best piece of advice I could give, kind of ties into my, you know, uh, fifth key, my keys to riches financial philosophy, which is take emotion out of the picture. And I even did a speech in Toastmasters on this, make the most of the coast. So when you pull back to neutral and sit there to figure things out, what you have to do is get yourself out of that physiological, emotional, chemical engagement. And you have to back up and separate the mistake and the meaning of what that did. Instead of saying it was bad or it was
Mm-hmm.
wrong or you failed, all of those words have negative connotations and they infer that some sort of penance needs to be paid. But if we take a
Mm.
step back in neutral and take the rose colored glasses off and look at things for what they are and only what they are, and not chastise and berate ourselves for making a bad decision, but desensitize ourselves. Instead of saying bad or good, we say effective or ineffective choices, because those are neutral words. And when we can start separating our connections with our ineffective decisions, that's when we start learning from our mistakes. And that took me repeating mistakes for me to figure that out. So the sooner you can say, oh, I need to put the brakes on, I need to go into neutral. And, what I say, make the most of the coast. A lot of people think when you start coasting, you're going downhill and you just like, always got to have it in gear. But in reality, if you take a step back, if you put your car in neutral and you're going downhill anyway, right? What's happening? If you don't touch the brake either, you're still going to pick up speed. And during that time of neutral, that's when you can really capitalize and do a personal inventory and an assessment, a non judgmental assessment of where you are, where you want to go, and a more effective way to get there, making different decisions. That way, when you do return to being in full gear, now you're going to be able to climb that next hill easier. And then you can reevaluate and then reconnect and just make the most of that coast part. That's the opportunity that we fail to seize in the moment. And for me, it took like the second failure, like big catastrophic financial failure, like sleeping on the floor in an apartment, kind of starting over, to figure that out. And so, I'm kind of stubborn, which as an entrepreneur, it's a good thing because I'm hungry and I'm dug in and I work, work, work. But then you can be also stubborn and not objective about things too. And, you're going to force the issue. Even if it's not working, you figure like, well, I want to, I'm just going to stay in for a little while longer. If I could just hold out a little while longer, but cashing in and moving on might be the best thing for you. But you have to be able to take that step back and be objective and really separate the meaning from the mistake, and let go of all of the emotion of the mistake and power through with that meaning of that message of why that didn't work, and then take that time to calculate the next plan.
Something that you mentioned that I think is really important. One of the biggest pieces of advice my father ever gave me is he said, never ever hold your self worth in esteem to your net worth because they're not correlated. Your money is not at all correlated to the goodness of your heart and the goodness of when you touch people. And he says, unfortunately, a lot of those are inversely correlated because the more you have, the more like entitled you said that, people are, which is true. I felt that, in myself and many of my own failures. And you start realizing that goodness really comes through pain. And the sad part about it is, which leads me to my final question, is how do you best mitigate loss and or pain? Because I know for a fact a lot of entrepreneurs and people in the United States and beyond right now are experiencing financial and or mental pain because their ego is not living up to their actual current circumstance, because there's a lot of things fighting against that daily dollar of us working on a daily basis, right? How do you mitigate that change, and how do you deal with loss to come out a stronger and healthier person after that?
Well, again, a lot of it is just languaging, and that's what I teach. And I'm doing my plan for professional success 2023 coming up next month. I think it's December 9th on a Friday. So you have the weekend to continue working on it. And it's a free workshop I do once a year for my Making Success Simple website. And it's makingsuccesssimple.com. And if you get on the email list, you'll be notified when we start opening up registration for that, because it's limited to 100 participants. And we talk about this. So you got to desensitize yourself. So we're not talking about loss in the
Mm-hmm.
punitive sense. Okay. So we've got to be able to separate those emotional words, those words that catapult ourselves into these negative emotions, and just say, sometimes I win, sometimes I learn. I never lose. And once I got
Mm.
that
Mm-hmm.
attitude,
Mm-hmm.
of I never lose. And we pay for education. Think about how much money universities make to teach kids things that they don't really learn until they get out in the real world. And the learning isn't in the winning. The learning is in the losing. And so you need to get financially invested. You need to put your money where your mouth is. And when it goes sideways, this is the prime opportunity to go take a step back and act like you're looking at somebody else's financials. Oh, I can see where you messed up over here. And you're telling it some other guy. I always say, yeah, when people say, hey, are you coming? And I'm like, yeah, there'll be three of us, me, myself, and I. So I can separate. So I'm able to separate the wins and the losses. And while I celebrate the wins, I don't get carried away and get overconfident, because I've done that
Mm-hmm.
before. But when I have the losses, that's my learning opportunity. Or like my art teacher says, my oops opportunity when you make a mistake. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when I learn. And so I don't look at a loss as a loss. I look at what didn't work. And I have an opportunity to non judgmentally evaluate what happens. And so the key for all these people to say one thing is to separate yourself from this. And you can do this by just taking a simple deep breath. I worked with a brain researcher and we did several studies. Take a glass of water when you feel yourself slipping into that feeling, that emotion, and raise your electrochemical conductivity. It'll change the physiology. And the best thing that you can do is walk. Get up and walk. And that will physiologically start processing all of the negative hormones that are coming into your body that are keeping you from making an effective decision. And walking is a great way. I always do these walk and talks, I call them. And sometimes with some of my coaching clients, they can't sit still. They don't want to sit across from you at the table. And body language and connection is what matters. So we'll just walk side by side. We'll go for a walk and we'll have our counseling session walking through the neighborhood or walking through the mall. Now they don't have to look at me. Now they can talk. Now they don't feel like they're being judged. And because they're moving, they're increasing circulation, they're getting oxygen to the brain, they're moving away that stuff. Now their ability to think critically comes back into play, and they're almost answering their own questions. So that's what you got to do.
That's important. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because after going after a traumatic breakup, I started walking, and walking every single day, at least like 5 miles a day. And it really changed the chemical makeup of my brain and the success constructs that I had for myself. So that's very accurate. Where can they find and follow you, Heather?
Well, if you want to be a part of this once a year free workshop, just go to makingsuccesssimple.com If you want to catch my show, go to unlockyourwealthtoday.com and you can see all the things that we do to help get you on track financially so you can live the life of your dreams right now today.
And can they follow you on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or anything of
I
that
am
like nature?
everywhere at Unlock Your Wealth on Instagram, Facebook. Unlock Your Wealth is my primary one for the financial tools. And then Making Success Simple is all about giving young entrepreneurs and side hustlers that professional edge they need to succeed. And Making Success Simple is also where you can find me on all the socials also.
Well, thank you so much, Heather, for taking the time. This was really educational. I'm sure the listeners got a lot from it. And thank you for sharing your time with us this morning.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. You know, you are making such a difference for folks because you are a young person out there killing it. And I say that only because I turned 53 the other day. So I get to officially be the old person. And it's critical that we educate those that are coming up because schools aren't teaching what we know to be true. And sometimes it's deleterious to their financial future because everybody doesn't get a trophy in the real world. And we don't do
So true.
effort-based
So
grading in the
true.
real world. So thank you for having me
It's
on.
very true. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. Take care.